Where's my team going to be playing? What are the new rules for the college football playoff in 2025? If you're the number 4 seed, does that mean that you're going to be getting a bye for sure in the 2025 college football playoff? Dean Legge here from Dawg Post covering college football for the last 25 years. But this is a new one. We have a 12-team playoff, and I'm going to go with you right now through all of the scenarios that you need to know about. On the screen, you're going to see rankings that are as of October 25th, 2025. So these are not the way they're going to be when the official rankings come out, but we have to do something, and there are some nuance here that I want to talk about, and you're going to see right away. Georgia is the 1 in this scenario. Oregon's the 2, the 3 Penn State, 4 Ohio State, and you can see on down the line. Now, it's important to note here that these are rankings. These are not seedings, and there is a difference. But let's just proceed as if these are the final rankings, and Georgia's won the SEC championship. Oregon's won the Big Ten over Ohio State and Penn State. Miami has defeated Clemson for the ACC championship. Iowa State has won the Big 12 narrowly over BYU. Independent Notre Dame, of course, does not have a conference championship, which means they cannot automatically qualify for the college football playoff. And then Boise State is the highest ranked Power 5 conference champion. What you're about to see will be different than the rankings. And this is a really important point and moment in all of this. The rankings do not necessarily mean the seedings. In 2027, the 2026 season, that will almost certainly change. And I can talk about that over time. But in 2025, what we're getting is there are 5 parameters that can automatically qualify you for winning and for getting into the college football playoff. 1 is to be the highest ranked conference champion in the Power 5. So that's Army, Navy, Boise, people like that in that world. Could have been East Carolina, Coastal, Georgia Southern, Troy, people like that. Those teams will get an automatic bye. It could be UNLV, it could be Utah State. But in this scenario, we're going to use Boise. They're the highest ranked for now. As of the time I'm talking about this, both Army and Navy are undefeated. So it could be one of those two. There's also a scenario where, this is a very unlikely one, that we could be waiting for Army-Navy to determine who the highest ranked Power 5 is. That would be crazy, but whatever. So I'm going to put this back on the screen. These are the rankings. They are not the seedings. There are qualifications for the seedings. Here we go. This is how things get different. The 1 and the 2 spots don't change. And for the record, I mean, I cannot imagine a scenario where the ACC champion or the Big 12 champion is the 1 or 2 right now in 2025. And frankly, I can't imagine that in 2026 and possibly from here on out. But as you can see, we go over the automatic champions. They get the automatic bids. These are champions. They get in. Southeastern Conference champion in this scenario would be Georgia. The Big Ten would be Ohio. It would be Oregon. Miami, because they are the highest, because they are the ACC champion and ranked higher than the Big 12 champion, they go in as the 3. That doesn't matter this year. I will talk about some of the nuance here as well. Iowa State as the 4 comes in as the Big 12 champion. They go in over and get a bye over Penn State, Ohio State, Texas, Tennessee, and LSU. Teams, as you may or may not recall, they are all ranked lower than. Is that right? Is that fair? I would say no, but that's none of my business. There's nothing I can do about that. As you may also see on the screen, or as you will also see on the screen, our friend the Irish, they're not around anymore. Why? The number 17 team in the rankings took their place. So this is not the top 12 teams. That is a very important distinction. This is not the top 12 teams. This is the top 11 teams, in theory, and the highest ranked group of 5. The group of 5 could be your number 1 overall seed, but the highest 4 teams the highest 4 conference champion teams, they will be the 1 through 4 seeds, okay? So that knocks Penn State and Ohio State, who were in our top 4, that knocks them out. Well, what does that actually mean? What are we getting at here? Here's the problem, or the value now. If you win your conference championship, you get a bye. If you don't, you don't. And you are playing perhaps at home, and you have to play on December 20th or 21st, whichever it is. I can't recall off the top of my head. But you're playing either that Friday before Christmas or Saturday before Christmas. So welcome to the party. So what would that look like? What's that going to look like, all right? Well, Penn State's the 5, okay? We have our rankings down here below from our seeding. Excuse me, we have our seedings, not our rankings. Our seedings are as follows. The 5 is going to host the 12, the 6 the 11, the 7 the 10, and then the 8 the 9. The College Football Playoff Committee does not care about rematches. I do not see any rematches off the top of my head here, but again, these are hypothetical rankings at the end that are based off of rankings that we have currently. Okay, my suspicion is these will not my suspicion. I'm almost certain that these will not match what we see. However, here we go with this. Now, 2 of these games are going to be on ESPN and ABC. 2 of them are going to be on TNT or Warner Brothers. Okay, whatever Warner does with them. I believe it's TBS, could be TNT. They'll stream it on their app, all this stuff. So in this scenario, Boise would travel across the country to play Penn State. Penn State would it would be treated as a Penn State home game. The apparatus, everything around it would be a Penn State home game. Ticket sales, media responsibility, all of that would be Penn State's responsibility, Ohio State's responsibility, Texas, Tennessee, all of those would be in place. College Football Playoff would control certain things, but it would be a home game for State College, Columbus, Austin, and Knoxville. What does it mean for Boise, BYU, Clemson, and LSU? It only means that they have to win the game on the road. It doesn't mean anything other than that. They could play a game, for instance, in the scenario of, let's just say, the scenarios of Texas would have, in this scenario, would have lost to Georgia in the SEC championship game. They'd be the 7. They would host Clemson. That means they would have played on December 7th in Atlanta, and then they would host a game 2 weeks later in Austin. All right, so on the 20th or the 21st, they could have either 13 days off or 14 days off. For Tennessee and LSU, they would have 3 weeks off from their games with respectively Oklahoma for LSU as well as Vanderbilt for Tennessee. Okay, so I'm pretty certain it's Tennessee for them. It's not Kentucky. So, and in the scenario of Penn State, which would have lost to Oregon in the Big Ten championship, they would have 2 weeks off. Ohio State would have 3. So here we have, and BYU would only have 2 weeks off. So the ultimate winner here would be Ohio State in this scenario would have 3 weeks off. None of the rest of these schools would have a notable favor over their visitor, besides Ohio State, who would not have played in the Big Ten championship game, but we'd be hosting a team that lost in their championship game. So that would be a distinct disadvantage for BYU. These other games, and for the Texas Clemson game, that would be 2 losers of championship games. Tennessee, LSU, those 2 games would be teams that played in their championship, did not play in their championship game. No distinct advantage there. Penn State, Boise, there would be a championship game scenario for both those teams, but they would not have a 7-day advantage. In this scenario, very specifically, Ohio State, in this scenario, okay, doesn't mean this is going to happen. But in this scenario, Ohio State would have a distinct advantage over BYU. But as you can see, it's not a massive advantage for everyone. 3 of the 4 games would be natural advantage. It would be 13 or 14 days for both teams. Let's move on to the quarterfinals. All I'm doing here are advancing the higher ranked seeds, okay? Because in this scenario, we're going to get into some more situations that are going to be tricky. The top 4 teams will be the hosts, so to speak, of their games. Why does that matter? Well, it matters for these 3 schools, and I'm going to highlight them: Georgia, Oregon, and Iowa State. So why does it not matter for the Canes? In this scenario, because the Orange Bowl, the ACC's designated home bowl, is hosting a semifinal game, that means the ACC champion is a bit of an orphan, and they are not tied in with a particular game. However, Georgia, Oregon, and Iowa State are tied in. So let me be real quick here and just get one of these out of the way because it's not like the other. Because of the situation with the Big Ten these days, they are the only tied in team to the Rose Bowl. Oregon is mandated to play in the Rose Bowl. Therefore, Oregon must play in the Rose Bowl against Ohio State in this scenario, okay? Ohio State was I've typed these in wrong, okay? So, actually, we're going to take a pause here because I have this wrong. It shows how confusing it can be. Stand by 1 second. Let me correct myself. So as you can see, let's go backwards here. I'm correcting myself on the fly here. So Penn State is the 5, Ohio State the 6, Texas the 7, and Tennessee the 8. I had that incorrectly at first, okay? Penn State, as the 5, would have to play the 4. The Canes would get the 6, which is Ohio State. The 2 would get the 7, which are the Horns. And the Dogs would get the 8, which was Tennessee, who won their matchup with LSU, okay? So in this scenario, we would see that you could have an all-SEC final. You could also have an all-Big Ten final, okay? Now, we would already see that by the breakdown of the 2 versus the opposite side here, okay? Now, let's just get back to what I was talking about a second ago. Oregon, as a Big Ten team, is mandated to play as the Big Ten champion in the Rose Bowl game. They are mandated to play in it. They have to, okay? The highest ranked champion of the Big 12 and the SEC is mandated to play in the Sugar Bowl. Ohio State. Iowa is the 4. Georgia is the 1. Georgia must play in the Sugar Bowl. And many of y'all know I cover Georgia. I can confirm to you that if they are the champion, they are anticipating playing in the Sugar Bowl. There's no way around it. That leaves the other 2 bowls. This is where it gets a little muddy for me. My basic understanding is that they would do it by the higher seed would get to choose. The Canes in that scenario would pick Atlanta. The Canes would be at a disadvantage no matter where they play Ohio State. Iowa State would get away as far as they could from Atlanta anyway. So the scenarios of the bottom 2 bowls could flip-flop depending on a couple of different things. But right now, one of the 2 of them would play in the Peach. The other would play in the Fiesta. And my suspicion would be that, the Peach Bowl would grab Miami, Ohio State. Ohio State would be there for 2 times in the last 3 years in that scenario. And then the Penn State folks who probably want nothing to do with Atlanta after getting popped by Ole Miss last year would go out to Phoenix, which would be a more natural tie for the Big 12, although not a permanent and firm tie. The Big 12 used to have, before 2018, I think it was, 2017, somewhere in that, 2016, might have been 2016 actually, they used to have a quasi tie-in with the Fiesta, but when things started getting kind of nuts, the Sugar Bowl tied in the champions of the Big 12 and the SEC. That's why they are mandated to go. Okay, with all that said, you would have a Sugar Bowl, which would give you Georgia and your Sugar Vols in a SEC East showdown in New Orleans for the right to go to the college football playoff semifinal games. You would have Oregon, Texas at the Rose Bowl. That would be a fascinating matchup. You'd have the Canes in Ohio State in Miami, and then you would have Iowa State against Penn State. We know in the scenario we're talking about, You would have Georgia, Oregon, Miami, and Iowa State sitting there waiting. We do not know who these guys would be. I mean, like, if you go back and you look and you say, oh, well, definitely LSU would. I mean, could you imagine Georgia playing LSU in Louisiana as the 1 seed? That would not be what they would want, okay? But they would have no choice. They would have no choice. They would have to play LSU in a road game as the 1 seed, okay? And when you look at Texas Clemson, I would imagine Texas win that game. I'm not certain they'd win that game right now, but they probably would win that game. Could BYU shock Ohio State and you would get a Miami-BYU showdown? I mean, would Boise beat Penn State? Man, I doubt it, but I don't trust Penn State at all. So, nonetheless, let's advance the higher seeds just because that's what we're doing in this scenario. I'm not predicting these things. I'm just telling you what's going on here. So, in this scenario, we have the high seeds of Oregon and Georgia playing the 3 and the 4. I'm sorry, I've got these. The numbers are wrong. The logos are correct. We have the 3 and the 4 playing their 1-2. So the 1 plays the 4, which would be Georgia against Iowa State, or as we saw earlier, could have been Penn State if they survive LSU or Tennessee and New Orleans. And then you would have Oregon, Miami in the 2-3. Now, here's where this actually does come back into play. The 1 seed determines where they want to play. Okay? We saw this in the past. So we saw this in 2021 where there was a build-up to Georgia picking between Miami or Dallas. All right? Well, what happened? Anybody know? Alabama kicked their brains in and won the Southeastern Conference Championship, became the 1 seed, and picked Dallas. Okay? I think that made sense in that scenario. But Georgia probably would have picked the Orange Bowl anyway. It's basically the same distance from Athens, but there's more Georgia people in Florida than there are in Texas. But in this scenario, it would also depend on who you're playing and all this stuff. In that scenario, it was Georgia. I think it was Georgia, Cincinnati. I mean, it was like such a mess in 21. I can't really remember it very well. In this scenario, I don't really know, to be honest with you. I know Oregon would be dead set on Georgia picking Miami, so they wouldn't have to play the Canes in Miami. All right, they'd do all they could do not to do that. It's possible Georgia would say, well, we're okay with y'all playing Miami in a home game, so we'll just take Dallas. So I actually don't know. If you were giving this scenario, my guess is Georgia may say, we'll take the Cotton Bowl. We will take the Cotton Bowl. There are some folks that would tell you, there are some football folks that would tell you the layout for the Cotton Bowl is better. Having dealt with the Orange Bowl twice in however many years, how do I say this nicely? The layout is not the greatest on earth. But Georgia could say, we've been down there twice. We've won twice. We've never been to Dallas as a staff. So I really don't know. But whoever the 1 is, and it could be Iowa State, or it could be the Canes. I mean, who knows? The 1 picks. The 1 picks. And they choose where they want to go. And these 2 games will be played. They're not played on the same day, which is kind of curious. So someone will have a slight advantage in terms of when they play their game. So that I don't think that should be undervalued. Now, it's not so much of an advantage as some other situations we've seen in the past. I mean, for Georgia to have played at the Rose Bowl and arrive after Alabama in 2017, who played in the Sugar Bowl, back to campus, taking about a day away from Georgia, that was not necessarily an ideal situation. But that's not what we're looking at here. In the semifinals for this year, the Orange would be played on the 9th. The Cotton would be played on the 10th. Knowing Kirby Smart, I would actually change this. I would say that Georgia would want that extra day. they would say, "Oh, we're playing in the game that gives us an extra day. Y'all can have that." Now, again, these are the reasons why you just cannot know. But everybody, no matter what, is going to have at minimum 10 days. The other thing is, if Georgia were to play, just Georgia, I'm speaking for Georgia specifically. I mean, if this is Penn State or Ohio State or, or Oregon or whoever, like if Oregon's picking, they're picking the Cotton Bowl because it's closer. So there's all of those scenarios. So whoever wins these games, then you're playing on the 20th, MLK in Atlanta at the Dome. And that, of course, is the easiest scenario. The one team would be in dark jerseys. The two would be in light. Oregon has been the away team in the national championship game. They've been away game and they've been the home team. Georgia's been the away game. They've been the home team. They've won it in both scenarios. Oregon's not won it in either. So that's all it would be. Whoever would play Georgia, Tennessee, Clemson, those teams would be the away team in Atlanta. And of course, the most obvious away team would be anybody playing Georgia in Atlanta, okay? Including Ohio State, who did a great job of taking that game, but coming to that game. But these are the scenarios. It's not quite as simple and as laid out as it could be or should be. I mean, if it were me, I would only go by the rankings and that's it. I would not do all this rigmarole where the 10 becomes the 4 because they want a league that's not as good as the other leagues. I think what you will see over time is that you will see multiple automatics for the Big Ten and the SEC. It could be 3, it could be 2. In other words, if you get to the championship game, you have an automatic bye into the quarterfinals. I think there's, or you have an automatic, not automatic to the semis, but the top 4 have an automatic to the quarters. I keep talking the wrong way. The top 4, no matter if they won their league or not, would be in there. Because you could have a scenario where Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, and LSU are all top 4 teams. You could have a scenario where these guys in the Big Ten are all 3 the best teams in the country, and they're getting penalized because they're not because they play in the same league. These leagues are not created equally. They're just not. And you can ask Clemson about their visit with Georgia and Atlanta at the beginning of the 24 season if these leagues are the same. They're not the same. What Iowa State's dealing with is not the same as what Georgia, Ohio State, etc. are dealing with. Georgia has played Clemson, non-conference. Georgia has played Texas, Alabama. They will play Oregon. They will play Ole Miss, and Tennessee. It is possible Georgia could play 3 teams that are in the playoff here. They could play it 4 times, though. They could play 4 top 12 games. They could play against Texas twice, Tennessee, and Clemson. Or they could play Tennessee twice, Texas once, and Clemson. Or they could play, they could play Texas, Tennessee, LSU, and Clemson. And, I mean, Oregon, the Big 12, the Big 10 schools could have something approaching that, but you're not getting that if you're BYU. You're not getting that if you're Clemson. You're not getting, Clemson could have 2 games against, 2. It would just be whatever the ACC championship game is, assuming it's Miami and Georgia. That's it. Well, that's not the same. So that's some stuff that Greg Sankey, as well as the Big Ten commissioner, are going to be dealing with over time here as we creep into the 2027 playoff. But I did want to give you a look at this. It's not as easy as it looks. The mandated games for the Big 12 and the SEC champion to go to the Sugar Bowl. I mean, if you're playing the Sugar Bowl against, LSU, that'd be really tricky as the higher seed. That would be unfair, but that's the scenario we're in right now. You could play the Cotton Bowl against Texas as a semifinal. That's not as unfair. Okay, that's not as unfair. It's unfair if you want to call it that, but it's not as bad. You could play a semifinal against Miami in their home stadium. That would be amazing, and that is completely possible / probable as the lower seed. So this is where we're at. It's better than 4. I'm not saying this is right to go to 12, but it's better than 4 in my opinion. But I did want to share all that with you. Thanks for watching. If you leave comments, I will try to answer them. We'll see you on the next video.